Ludo, the stage is yours. And guys, please correct the clock, because otherwise you will only have 3 minutes. Don't worry, you have way more. Enjoy.
Thank you. And yes, it is still true. We still have more women than men, but we're changing that. So today, actually, I want to talk to you about growth. And first, a little bit of background about me. I joined Pinterest back in early 2013 as the company was starting to think about growth. And today, I lead all of the growth efforts across Pinterest that help over 200 million people every month find inspiration from the product. So today, I want to talk about some of the findings that we have from scaling Pinterest and growing it. What I'd like to focus on is to talk about what growth as a function is. What do growth teams usually do in case you're thinking of starting one? And a topic that usually doesn't get a lot of quality information online, but I view as a vital secret tool for the companies that do get it right, which is what are some of the characteristics of highly effective growth teams? Before I talk about growth at scale, though, I'd like to share one of my favorite Pinterest stories. And it's the story of how Pinterest was launched. Early in 2010, after many feedback sessions, our founder and CEO, Ben, was getting ready to launch the site to help people find inspiration. Working with one of the early users and influencers, they set up a campaign called Pin It Forward to get traction behind the product. And the basics of the idea was this. Every day, for 30 days, 10 bloggers will describe their pinboard and introduce the next blogger. Effectively, this will be a month-long tour of inspiring images collected by a wide array of creatively oriented bloggers. We love this idea. The idea is simple. Share your inspiration and introduce the next person along. And what made this really transformational for Pinterest is not that 300 bloggers posted their inspiration online. It was that they fell in love with a product that allowed them to express their inspiration and continue to use that product onwards. We actually internally have dubbed these early Pinterest cohorts the golden cohort. And we use them as our high bar of how we think about the product potential at scale. Many of these folks are still on Pinterest today, finding inspiration about their everyday lives. Everything from what to cook tonight to starting a new business. This is my favorite story because it showcases two things that are very important about growth. One is that when you're starting up, your focus should be exclusively on understanding your user needs and not on growth. And two, you can't grow a product that doesn't have a product market fit and that people don't love or continue to use. So the lesson here is simple. There is no substitute for connecting deeply with your user base and making sure you are providing a solution that fits their needs. Having a product that works is non-negotiable for being successful at growth. And assuming you have a great product that works and has some traction behind it, growth is a great way to really amplify the reach of your product. Now let's talk about growth at scale. When investors value consumer businesses like Pinterest, they look at two things: revenue and user growth. For investors, user growth has become the biggest leading indicator of the company's potential to grow its revenue and cash flow in the future. Companies such as Facebook, LinkedIn, Amazon all use growth tactics in the early 2000s to build massive global businesses. And starting around 2010, the techniques they used started to become more formally recognized as growth. Now, growth really is the discipline that focuses on the experiences that really matter for your users and making them really, really effective. The purpose of growth is to scale the usage of a product that has product market fit. And you do that by building a playbook and keeping track of the things that work and focusing on them relentlessly. Another thing that is really distinctive about growth as a function is that growth is oriented around the life cycle of the user. And in doing that, the goal is to drive impact along that user life cycle. And that usually breaks in three big areas: helping users discover your product, making sure that they get to that magical aha moment of the product as fast as possible, and making sure that users get repeat value as often as possible. That's it. And not surprisingly at Pinterest, our team follows very, very closely this orientation as well. We have a team that is looking how to get users, how to expose content to users where they are, on SEO, notifications, social channels. We have a team that is looking how to get them to that first inspiration, to that magical aha moment. And a team that is looking at various ways in which we can deliver inspiration to users as often as possible. A good example of following this user journey is a change that we made some time ago to get users to that aha moment much more seamlessly. As a growth team, we knew that finding and saving your first idea was that aha moment for many users. And we used to call that action Pin It. And while that worked really great in the States, internationally, it was hard for people to get what Pin It is, let alone translate it to native languages. And so we renamed the action from Pin It to Save. And while this sounds like a very simple technology solution, from a company identity perspective, this was a really tough decision. And it would have been impossible for us to do that if we didn't have the framing of why we should do such a change. So growth is a discipline that focuses on improving the experiences that really matter for your users. Now let's talk about what growth teams really do. Growth teams are comprised of a mix of engineers, designers, product managers, analysts, marketers, so a highly cross-functional set of folks that can operate within that growth model and impact the user experience at scale. And the exact mix of people and functions, which function is dominant or not present, is not as important. At Pinterest, we take a product-oriented approach to growth. So our primary functions are engineering, product, and design. But there are companies that have marketing or other functions that come first and that have been super successful at growth. And the day job of the growth team is really this. It's to look at data, come up with hypotheses about potential improvements in the user experience at scale, and measure the effect of these experiences. It's as simple as that. Rinse and repeat. And in doing this, the day job of the growth team is to constantly challenge existing product assumptions. Regardless of the markup of the growth team, one of the most important things to remember is that a growth team is only as effective as the technology investment behind it. And that usually comes in the form of having the right tools and systems to be able to look at data and measure effects. Being able to take accurate actions for users at scale requires a fair bit of investment in using the best possible tools, either off the shelf or building them internally. And at Pinterest, even though we ultimately go our growth team on the impact to the users, the split is roughly 40-60. So 40% of the team investment goes towards product experiences, and 60 goes towards making the best possible infrastructure to enable for faster and more precise product improvements. Now that we've recapped what growth does and what growth teams really look like, let's talk a little bit about what are some of the characteristics of highly effective growth teams. First and foremost, effective growth teams are really obsessive about metrics architecture. This is because once a metric is set, the team will certainly find a way to optimize it. But if it's the wrong metric, it can cause a lot of bad behaviors or unintended consequences. For example, if you consider these 3 hypothetical curves and you just optimize for bringing people to your product, on day 1, you might think of them as the same value. But if you fast forward 4 weeks later, they have a massively different impact to the bottom line of your business. And of course, it would be really bad if for every experiment your team was running, it took a month to be able to tell whether that experience is good or bad. And thus, metrics architecture really becomes a balance between precision of prediction and speed of iteration. And for Pinterest, for example, we made a major breakthrough on our acquisition front a few years back when we transitioned from measuring for distinct events like traffic or signups to something we called activated signups, or signups for which we saw the users were still active 28 days later, while simultaneously developing a metric that allowed us to tell if the experience is positive or negative just within a couple of days. Building individual ownership is another very distinct feature of effective growth teams. Good growth teams are the ones that are comprised of creative risk takers that have a serious can-do attitude and are passionate about making impact through metrics and improving the product. A big reason for this is that growth usually comes up with a lot of experiments, and often these experiments don't succeed. And it takes all the characteristics and a very low ego to be able to sustain in that environment. One of my favorite things about highly effective growth teams is their mode of operation, which is something I secretly call creative chaos. It's that ability to hold on to a loosely defined roadmap, but really be able to break away from the process and just follow the data. And the analogy of this mode of operation is similar to how ships use stars for navigation in open sea. If you just stare at the sky with untrained eyes, you'll probably see a lot of stars, for you that will be noise. But if you learn to recognize the patterns in these stars, you can start to see past the noise and be able to effectively use them to orient yourself towards your destination. And when it comes to your product, there's hardly a predefined map that you can simply follow to success. So using data is critical. At Pinterest, it's not uncommon for us to pivot away very rapidly based on new findings. We have a lot of examples of experiments that we thought about the morning of, and we had them in production being tested with real users by the end of the day, as opposed to working on something else that just happened to be on our roadmap. And given that growth is very iterative and exploratory function, it only makes sense to optimize for the iteration cycle as much as possible. Now, growth teams tend to do a lot of things. And when you're doing a lot of things, it's very helpful to have some way of reasoning about when should you expect value to be realized from these undertakings. And to be able to answer this, highly effective growth teams usually hold on to a portfolio of opportunities that they understand. And in Pinterest, we express this in the following way. We have cash cows, which are things that we understand are going to work because we've made investments in these areas, like making the site faster and getting when people are trying to load the site. We have investments for which we have some data and evidence that that could work, but we'll need to put some serious work behind. And we have bets, which are somewhat speculative and big ideas that can transform our growth curve if they turn out to be successful. And one of the things we try to do is to make sure that this balanced opportunity portfolio management philosophy is applied on individual, team, and organizational level. This tends to prevent fatigue in the team and also provides folks with an array of opportunities for them to try. Now, finally, it's really important to create a culture of celebrating success at a small scale. We have a great tradition in the growth team that we call win emails. For every experiment we ship, the person working on that experience gets to send an email to the entire team, highlighting the work that they did and the effects that it had on the user. This tradition is a big internal motivating factor and also has helped effectively orient the team around the parts of the funnel that really have potential to be improved. To recap, highly effective growth teams have some common characteristics. They're empowered, tech-savvy, self-motivated, and understand the user can be unlocked for the future product potential. These are some of the growth lessons that we learned while scaling Pinterest. Growth as a function is still relatively new, so hopefully this gives you some extra edge in making sure that you find ways to grow your business, but more importantly, find more opportunities to make your product really effective for your users. Thank you.